like, how have we got here? And it was just, they all stood in a circle and just pointed to the bloke to the left. So, which for us in our area, if we did that in our high performance field,
you'd be gone.
Gain or personal positioning, right? Which can put some people in conflict with themselves. So for me, it's a very straightforward approach, and throughout my coaching career and throughout my kind of my life, really, if I'm honest with you, I'm driven by injustice. So that's a big piece of it for me. Again, is a club that is full of waifs and strays, and that's kind of the underdog. It was an underdog club, and if you think about all of my kind of adventures have always been around realizing potential, because that's what drives me. I have a passion to make things better. I have a passion to make the underdog smile, to know that they belong wherever they belong.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. You are now tuned in to the greatest of all time, the greatest of all time.
Welcome to the Rugby Swag Show. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another great episode of Rugby Swag. My name is GiftTime and Baylor, and this is a show where we make sure you don't lose the stories in ignorance through news and interviews. Y'all, we got a great one for you guys today. We have the great Mike Friday, former USA Rugby Men's Sevens and Olympic head coach. Great conversation that we have today. Obviously, you guys saw the title, so I know that's why you're here. But before we even get started, I need you guys, please, before you continue on with this, please go ahead and hit that like button. Please subscribe, leave a comment, continue the information, the conversation, the interaction, the engagement, whatever you want to call it, man. I want you to be a part of it and continue to build into the community itself, y'all. Yo, I'm so happy to be able to have you guys here. Just know you are truly a blessed one. Anyways, of course, please, we also need you guys to share this with your friends and family. And if they don't take it from the YouTube channel, please go ahead and check us out on audio. You can check us out on any major streaming platform. That is Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, wherever it is, Rugby Swag Show. And you guys can be able to share this and listen to it on your travels, your adventures, get the information, get the details, get in down dirty and deep into the concept of who these people really are and why they are making the impacts that they do within our rugby. And lastly, of course, but not the least, please go ahead and check us out on social media. You can find us on IG at Rugby Swag Show, on Facebook at GiftTime Rugby, on TikTok at GiftTime Rugby. That's GiftTime with 2 T's in there. On Twitch on occasion, and of course, right here on YouTube at youtube.com/GiftTime Rugby. Y'all, this was a great conversation. I'm moving fast because this is a great conversation. I genuinely enjoyed it. I'd only met Mike officially through the show that we do with Matt McCarthy, Rugby Odds. And obviously, we've had critiques, and I've talked about him. But, you never know what information gets out. And that's why you also need to be able to stand on your business and know that, if you're going to be put an opinion out there, know that there's people that are going to listen to it, and whether there's a reward or a consequence that goes with it, you go with it. But in this situation, man, Mike was real, legit, very forthright, very transparent. I love it when a coach doesn't use coaches speak and they speak from the heart. And I genuinely think there was a lot to be learned from this. I think there was a bunch that I took from the conversation that I didn't even either realize or I didn't appreciate as much when it happened. So I hope you guys get the same feeling. I hope you guys get a chance to enjoy the convo. This is one of those where it's just for me, it was psychologically game changing on how the progression of rugby goes always. And yeah, just trying to see where it goes from there. So, I'm not going to hold back for much longer. Of course, we're going to take care of those that take care of us. So, take a look at from those that sponsor us, healthenhancedfoods.com. Absolutely, go check out the website to get your specialty bread mixes. These are the ones that you're going to need, especially as an athlete, so you can build up without having all the negative outcome of carbohydrates in the processed way, in the worst way, in the inorganic way. This is where you get it. Healthenhancedfoods.com. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but in the meantime, I hope that you guys enjoy this. So please, without further ado, enjoy the Mike Friday, former USA Men's Rugby Sevens head coach and three-time Olympic head coach. Check it out.
Buckwheat is changing lives. My name is GiftTime. I'm here with Health Enhanced Foods, and I want to tell you about one of my favorite products on our shelves, buckwheat baking mix. Buckwheat is a seed that is incredibly nutrient and protein dense. But what makes it even more important, that buckwheat baking mix is absolutely gluten-free. A lot of times whenever people have buckwheat mixes, they actually even hold wheat inside of it. So you know it's not fully gluten. And if you're a person that is celiac or diabetic, or you're just really trying to be health conscious, it's not something that you want to have to worry about. What makes our buckwheat baking mix even more important is that it is versatile. You can use it for pancakes, you can use it for waffles, you can use it for making loaves of bread, you can make it for cupcakes. But what helps even more is that it is allergen-free, it is nut-free, it is dairy-free, that there is no additional additives in it. There's no leavening there, so that if you want to be able to raise your bread, you can put in the baking powder yourself and get it fluffy. If you don't, you absolutely do not have to. You get the bread that you love without the cost to your health. You can absolutely find buckwheat baking mix at healthenhancedfoods.com. Absolutely check it out. Get your nostalgia back. Get back to eating and loving the way that you are, and absolutely get back to the energy that you know that you can get without having to destroy yourself. I'm looking forward to seeing you get it. Let's go.
What's up, everybody? We got another special guest for us today here on Rugby Swag Show. Y'all, this man has been a multiple Olympic coach, running the USA Sevens team, and actually put us onto the map as a foundational team and not a laughingstock anymore. That man is known as the Otoyo in Kenya, the hyena. All right. We're talking about the great, because he's not the late, the great, the former, the man, Mike Friday. Mike, man, thank you for coming through.
All good. Toya, I tell you, Jesus, the hyena. I don't know. I mean, I think that's because I used to chase away the vultures in Kenya. That was the crack.
You have to go out and protect them from eating the scraps, man. It's like, hey, I got to protect my scraps.
100%, mate, and protect them from some interesting characters.
I feel like that's the general game when it comes to rugby. Like, who do I protect and who do I protect them from?
I know the truth.
Man. Well, Mike, look, man, I always say, man, it is always a pleasure, absolutely, to have you on. I know this has been one of those things where there's been a lot of talk. There's not been a lot of response, but you've been able to talk a lot more. Big shout out to Lance Kavanaugh and the partnership. I'm going to call what you guys had a partnership that you guys were able to do for basically like 5 episodes of interviews, which I think is great. And then obviously what you've been able to do with the USA team. But even more so, I really appreciated the fact that you have no couth. And it makes me feel so good because I do not like really stiff coaching. Like it takes away the authenticity of it. And I feel like that's a reason, and from what people have said, has been why people play so hard for you, because you are a real one. So I want to just give your props and credence to that, first and foremost, for just being a legitimately authentic human being by everybody's accounts. There has been no pullback on that one.
Thanks for that, mate. No, good. I mean, the reality is the key to coaching is be authentic, be yourself. And I'm a simple bloke. I was brought up very simplistically, but with strong values. My mum and dad were very strong on the right behaviours and the right values, and that's live with me. You do the right thing. even if it means it's the wrong thing for you. But if it's the right thing for us, then it must be the right thing. So you have to put the team over kind of personal gain or personal positioning, right? Which can put some people in conflict with themselves. So for me, it's a very straightforward approach. And throughout my coaching career and throughout my kind of my life, really, if honest with you, I'm driven by injustice. So that's a big piece of it for me.
No, that's real. Okay, we're dropping bars early. All right, let's go, coach. Let's go. All right. Well, look, before we get into it, because I always like to say, every superhero has their origin stories with it. And sir, for you got an origin story that I think is quite interesting. That's obviously led to a great history and a legacy along with it. But to get it asked, how, sir, did you get started with rugby?
Well, as in at the very start.
I'm talking about the beginning. I said, we're talking your story.
Okay, that's a long time ago. Well, basically at the age of 5, well, 4 probably. I think it was 4. So the long and the short of it is that I was part of the very first mini rugby team that started at our local club, Bromley Rugby Club, which is where my dad played, and that was just a local grassroots rugby club down in southeast London, and they started in 1976, Jesus. And I went along as a 4-year-old and got stuck in. I mean, I've been watching my dad play anyway, for the couple of years before, and that was just what we did. So on a Sunday morning, bright and breezy, I was up with the birds and ready to rock and roll and go to rugby on a Sunday morning. And that's where it started for me. And as I progressed through kind of junior school and then into secondary school or high school, as we would call it, I actually went to a football school or a soccer school in England where we just played football. We didn't play rugby because I didn't go to a private school. I went to a state school. So in England, pretty much rugby was a middle class private school game, and I was from a local state school, comprehensive school, and we played football. So I played football, and then every Sunday morning, I'd go and play rugby. So the long and short of it is like I didn't really have a very traditional route in rugby because I came from a state school, 1, and 2 came through a football system. And the reality is this. I was a failed soccer player, which is why I ended up in rugby. And that's the same for most rugby players in England, is that they were all probably decent sportsmen and decent footballers, but they weren't good enough to play that. So you picked your poison. And rugby's kind of where I ended up. And some of the experiences I had as a young man growing up from the ages of kind of 11 through to 18, 19 kind of shaped me probably for life in the future, because I had to deal with being a state school kid that was trying to make his way in what was a privately educated kind of sport. So let's just say I had some proper knockbacks, not because of ability, but because I went to the wrong school.
Man, See, you've opened up a can of worms here, because this adds a lot of kind of context to even how rugby is portrayed. Because look, we know so typically England, New Zealand, France, all the traditional rugby powers, it's always been a wild situation where rugby does not sit, I feel like, in almost any country except for maybe New Zealand and then the Oceania Islands, as a number 1 sport. And really, I would even argue it might not even be a top 3, maybe right at 4 for a lot of countries. Like, I feel like for England, rugby sits at maybe 3 behind soccer, football, whatever, cricket, and then this jump back and forth maybe on basketball or tennis. And then you got rugby right behind that. In France, it's basketball, soccer, and maybe rugby, but it's iffy. But basketball and soccer really take the charge on that one. Even South Africa has cricket, football, and then maybe rugby coming in at 3rd place, with basketball really trying to creep in at that point. So to see that even for you guys, rugby is an alternative route and not necessarily always a direct one outside of this specific ecosystem that you'd be living in.
Yeah, I think it's being blunt. Historically, it's class driven. That's the reality.
Right.
So, like, if you know, football and all of those kind of, you know, France, England, and all that is it, right? Because that is the number one sport. Whether you do cricket, hockey, or rugby, you know, or field hockey as you would call it, they're kind of more what you would call the independent schools or the private school kind of options. But ultimately, even the state school kids are, if they're no good, if they can't make it in football, then they'll look at alternative team sports. And that is changing. That has changed probably over the last 10, 15 years. But, you know, back when I was coming through, it very much was the case. And that's, you know, that's the case. If you take it down in South Africa, the reality is, depending on what school you're like, if you think about it, there's a lot of kids from the townships and from the flats that chase the soccer ball.
Right.
And, you know, if being candid, that yes, there's a lot more opportunity now in South Africa to make it if you're from a hard background.
Right.
But, you know, that's an evolution piece. So I think that's, you know, we're breaking that down. You know, like you just said, New Zealand is different. You know, that's it's inbred there. That's, you know, they're not particularly good at football either. Same,
Right.
you know, Australia have to deal with AFL. They have to deal with rugby league and things like that. So there are a lot of alternatives, but I do think it's class driven. And, you know, the issue is that probably historically, dare I say it was a bit of a closed shop because it was class driven. And I think what's happened with the onset of professionalism in rugby, it's now become more of an open shop. But ultimately, the skill and the expertise and the coaching and the opportunity still lies within the private school system rather than the state school system. Because what you see certainly in England is those best 14, 15-year-olds are then swept up and taken to private schools. And, you know, that just wasn't an option back in my day. And the reality is that, you know, as a consequence, it drove a real sense of injustice or that kind of value in me, which I was like, that I will never let that happen again on my watch, be it me from a coaching perspective or from a playing perspective. So that has stayed with me wherever I've gone in the world, right? Be it England, be it Kenya, be it in America, where the landscapes are different and there are different problems and different issues. But the reality is that the value system and the behaviors that you as an individual have to live by cannot be compromised, even if it means you've got to take on, being blunt, the people that are above you, in order to protect and give those around you consistency of message, consistency of action, so that they know that the reality is that you're living by the same values and behaviors you're expecting them to live by. I mean, it's not rocket, right? Is it? I mean, it's just simple.
It's not complex, but it's not a complex idea, but it is a complex execution because there is so much of a subjective variable of what that justice or injustice actually means. Like in one hand, you go, yeah, the bigger guys are taking these kids and taking them into the private school, negative, because it's a brain drain from these public arenas. On the other hand, you go, well, the justice is that you're presenting these kids into a different opportunity where they might be able to elevate further than what they were able to do, whether it is in rugby or that. And so you have this back and forth. But again, it always feels like it's the ego that plays the most part in this concept.
So spot on. And I'm, you know, sharing a little bit of the story with the with how it goes full circle. So we fast forward to me having Harrison and Lucas.
Yeah.
And I was in my words, I was an inverted snob. There's no way I'm sending my kids to private school. No way. And it was only my mum that was like, well, why don't you just go and have a look? So I went and had a look. And I was like, wow, I can't believe the opportunities that they could have that I never had. And as a consequence, my mind switched and they've gone there and they've excelled academically, because the reality is that you're pushed hard academically. And so my eldest Harrison always wants to excel. So he'll always be at the top of the class, whatever class, whereas Lucas will always sit in the middle. So if he's in if he's at a state school or a lesser challenging environment, he will sit in the middle of that. You put him in a high challenging environment, he will sit in the middle of that. So as a consequence, and as a result, the rugby opportunities and the rugby development, you know, irrelevant of what I can give them, they've had and they benefited from, and you know, they're flying. Like, you know, Harrison's doing really well playing in National League Rugby. Lucas has excelled. He's signed professionally. He's won the 20th World Cup as the youngest man at that World Cup, and he's flying. So, you know, I've evolved, and you've just hit the nail on the head. Is like the injustice for me is not, if people can take advantage of those opportunities, that's fine. But don't judge the person without giving them the opportunity to show their ability, which is what I had to deal with because of where I came from. And that's the injustice. So when you know, so let's just say, for example, let's fast forward to the USA, right? Bring people into camp. I don't care whether they've been at Harvard, Cal, or they haven't been to college because they couldn't afford or they didn't want to go to college. The reality is, if I will bring them in and I will assess them, and then you will look at their potential, and then you look at their character, and then you look at what their upside is and what they can give, and whether or not they're prepared to go to the dark places in order to do that. And can they be consistent on the behaviors and the values that you want them to live by, so you get alignment in the environment, and being consistent yourself to ensure that happens, whilst realizing you've got to treat every player differently. And there is a difference, right? Because you've got to treat every player differently. You've got to understand their personality. But again, then you have to have all those conversations with players that go, well, you're treating them differently to me. I am treating them differently to you, but there's consistency in message, and there's consistency in the non-negotiables, i.e. there are some non-negotiables that you've got this kind of pitch where you can jump around. Right. Like all blokes especially, and I would probably suffice women as well. They're always going to put their foot over the line to see if they can get away with something.
Of course, the natural inclination is, can I push the limits into boundaries to see exactly where my limits and my boundaries actually reside?
And then it's a case of, is that a bendy boundary, or is that a hard boundary? And the reality is, if people do step over the hard boundaries, it's not a case of you're done. It's like, no, you've got to give them an opportunity to correct and change. And if they consistently step over it and they compromise the bigger picture, then that's a different conversation, right? But I'm always about allowing people to explore and find themselves as people, not just as rugby players, but also give them very, I don't know, consistent messaging and consistent actions.
It's essentially, you have a level standard. I always call it something. So this is a theory that I've always had, not a theory, more of an observation that I have when people talk about countries to countries. I think there's always, especially, you know, as a US person, you know, we're always, US is the best country, free, blah, blah, blah. But the reality of the context is that every country has its ceiling and its floor. And the question is, what is the ceiling and the floor that fits to the character of the person who is able to make the most of it? So I'll use an example like Japan. I feel like Japan is a place where you can find consistency. If you are a person that just wants to be able to be sure of what tomorrow is going to bring, Japan is a great place to go. If you want to be able to rise very fast, you're probably not going to be great, but you also won't fall very far. On the flip side, the US is one of those areas where you have a large amount of space to be able to try what you want to do. The catch-22 is you have a very low floor, and people will let you drop. Other side, you have a very high ceiling, and you arguably could be able to reach levels that you wouldn't naturally do. The question is, what is the value system that goes for your standards within that element?
Yeah, I hear you on that, and that's the point. And my values are very straightforward. They're human values. Yeah. So if you live by human values, for me, to certain levels, in terms of, you know, you're honest, you're level, you're hardworking, and you know, which again, very easy words to say,
right? Again,
bloody difficult to live by day on day, right? Because everybody tries to cut corners some days. And it's to what extent that will affect the group and the mission. So, you know, it's also being consciously aware of the different type of personalities that can be within a group, which I think is the other big variable in your high and low floors, right? Absolutely. And you use a really good example. So, for example, when I was with Kenya, right, it was actually quite straightforward. There's four main tribes. So if you understand that hierarchy and how that works and the history, then that's fine. But the reality is that the boys within that group, all of them have got nothing. So the reality is you can get quite alignment quite easily. And, you look at England, you've got a state school system and a private school system. But actually, once you break that down, you've got young men that just want to be rugby players and be the best they can be. So you've got great alignment there. You come to the United States, holy moly, the cultural diversity was bonkers and is bonkers. Right. So the ability to be misunderstood is huge.
It's just the nearest of margins that go along with it.
Real examples, I could be saying one thing and I've upset Macca and 3 others are happy. 2 are just switched off, and these 2 over here are not interested. And it will just be the language piece that you've used in that moment, because you've got to understand the diversity of the personalities, and more importantly, they've all got to understand each other's personalities and be able to communicate and change their communication depending on who they're talking to. So and again, like you said, America's a harsh place, right? Because they will just let you drop. And the big thing for me as well in America, which I think is hard for everybody to grasp and understand, is that we have these super sports where you've got 1 in and you've got 1,000 ready. Yeah. So if you don't hit it, you're gone, right? And that's the problem is they try and apply that to all the sports, and they try and apply that to all of their coaching. And it's like, it's very easy to coach if you've got a depth chart as deep as you like.
Right. There's always that guy that's right on the outside. He's ready to go. He's looking for that opportunity. Just give him the space.
So you can be dictatorial as a coach, right? Which isn't really coaching in my book, because I think your responsibility as a coach is to mentor and nurture, and allow them to grow as a person, not just as a player. They're not. For them to become a better player, they need to be a better person. You've heard me say this so many times, but it's so true. But you as a coach, you've got to live by that, and you've got to be like that. And that means that it's not necessarily always penalizing them when they fail or they muck up, and it's allowing them to have every opportunity to succeed the next day without carrying the fact that they might have seriously mucked up the day before. Of course, there are some non-negotiables, but that comes down to the human values, right? That's
right. I was going to say, it's what is the box standard, and then obviously where's our flexibility that goes with that. But before you continue on with that, I do want to kind of step back a little bit, because I want to understand how this became so ingrained for you. Because there's one thing to be like, had good people and support and people, but not a lot of people have a lot of great support and a lot of great instance, but may not be as hard-nosed about being very justified and objectively justified in the action. So, you talked about that you grew up in Southeast England. And for me, I know very little about the regionality of how England functions. I'll have friends and cousins that live there. Again, I'm Nigerian, so we're everywhere. So I understand that there is a facet of class maintenance, if you may. Like, people have a tendency to stay where they grew up and kind of maintain the structure as is, not necessarily as a negative, but just simply what is, and we continue to go that way. So for you being in Southeast London, and I know Northern London tends to get bullied for being very country, so I don't know what Southeast of England actually ends up being, but for you, was the situation one where you had a very clear line that there's these private school kids and then there's the non-private school kids, or was this something that was a factor that your family itself had, and just you saw that kind of grow in consistency as you got older at a younger age?
No, I think it's shaped by your own experiences. Really, you are shaped by your own experiences, and I came from a state school education. Don't forget, some of it is my shortcomings. My ignorance when you're a young guy is that, state school kid, private school kid. Some of my best friends now that I play rugby with all went to private school, and they're just like me. but when you're growing up, you create these things in your mind. I think some experiences shaped something, little things trigger you that stay with you for your whole life, that drive your value system. One experience, like I said, I was sent for a selection for the county in southeast London, and they literally called me, took my name, and then they asked me my school. I told them my school, and they just looked at me in disgust, and then told me to go and sit over there. And I sat there for 87 of the 90 minutes, and they put me on for 3 minutes. And then the guy that actually got picked wasn't even at the trial. And then what's worse than that is then the local clubs, like my local club Bromley, didn't have my age group at that time, right? So I was playing for their 21s, but they didn't have a 19s. So they said, "Oh, come and play for us." And they had that county scrum half, but they didn't pick him; they picked me. And it was like, it was just like, you're just like, you've not made an objective decision. If he's better than me, he's better than me.
Right.
You got to.
But he's not here to even show it. He's not even here.
Not even giving me an opportunity, and you've just looked at me and you looked me up and down, and you made a decision. And it's not like that now, but it was back then, and that's how it shaped me. And I got taken from southeast London. I got taken up to Wasps as a 19-year-old, which is northwest London.
Right.
So, and that again is a club that is full of waifs and strays, and that's kind of the underdog. It was an underdog club. And if you think about all of my kind of adventures have always been around realizing potential, because that's what drives me. I have a passion to make things better. I have a passion to make the underdog smile, to know that they belong wherever they belong. Because when I took on England, like when I played for England Sevens and all that, everyone was like, "Oh, why aren't you doing better?" Because we had really talented players, but we had a shit system. Because that was just the way that England Sevens was. It was almost like their divine right that we should be okay, but we'll just come in the night before, we'll come together, and we had no processes, none of that. So when I got involved with England Sevens, we were like languishing around 7th, 8th in the world. Right. So when I finished and I left England, we were number 1 in the world. We just narrowly lost to Fiji again. It's the bane of my life. Anyway, I've got Fiji off the World Series. We finished 2nd. Does it all sound familiar? But see, my whole point around that World Series stay with England was we helped develop 40 players go on to play for their country in the 15s. So there was a reason that the last tournament, as you went in going for the World Series, we had to let 4 or 5 of our players go on higher up to the international tree, playing for England A. So, but that was the gig, that was the game, that was the purpose. You develop the movement, and that would be the success. It's not just to win, but it's to see the players be able to progress. It's not the exit wins and losses, right? And that was the same in Kenya, right? 13th, 14th in the series, but massive potential. We ended up finishing 4th in the World Series, and we were a rainfall away from making the World Cup final. And then you look at USA when I arrived, with 13th in the World Series. We were on the way out, all but done. And as well as I do, in America, that they love supporting their country, but only if they're winning. And then what the journey we went on that, and we had a fabulous journey. But again, it was the underdog. It was realizing potential. It was, again, seeing young men realize their potential as men and rugby players, which is kind of what drives me. So that's the theme. That's the project. Don't get me wrong. I like winning.
Right. But again, but the notion of what the win is clearly varies not varies, but it's clearly based off of, can I get the person better? And the icing on the cake is we will get the results off the field, like in a way that's actually progressive.
That will follow. Do you know what I mean? Whereas people are like, well, what we're gonna, for me, it's like we've got to create a clear environment and a clear culture that you have to live by. So again, giving young men clarity on that, they can either choose to be in or out. Your choice, but if you commit to be in, you will be held to this, and there will be challenging conversations. you won't be allowed to get away with this. And then you try and empower them. So ultimately then they end up managing themselves and growing them and dealing with themselves and bring themselves in order. And that's probably where we ended up with that very first group in that kind of 2019 series and 2020 before COVID hit.
COVID kicked in.
And bankruptcy. I mean, that proper derailed the squad at that time. But you know, and we might talk about it, we might not, but
we'll talk about that. I kind of just want to make sure I'm getting even a lot of context. And you know, if it goes deep, I mean, this is what to be expected. I love to go deep with this because I do believe that so much of what we do early projects as to what we do later. It seems like a very cliche statement, but you know, yeah. So like within that concept, you know, with like we talk about regionally and dealing with just the BS and again a classism of sorts getting into it, you're still able to be one of the best scrummies. You're able to get onto the England team, the U20 team, then the England actual team and the Sevens team. Like for you, this process, did you feel like this was something that was part of the mission, the ambition, or it was just like, I'm just really, really good and this is just a natural progression of how things go?
No. I mean, here's the thing, right? So I did all right as a rugby player personally, but I didn't excel. So I played professionally. I played for Wasps.
You won a championship with the Wasps too, right?
I played and captained England Sevens, right? But I never quite made it to England 15s because the guys I was I'm the same age as Kieran Bracken, Matt Dawson, Austin Healy, and those boys. So and they went through all the age groups. So I'm not even suggesting that I would have ever at the age group level back then. It was ridiculously competitive. But it's interesting. You just hit a really good point here that what happens in your early life shapes you. So I was a running 9. So like, I was like 3 foot, but you want me to kick and pass? Like I'm like, well, yeah, maybe, but pretty key for a 9. But
the one job, put that to the side.
this will make you giggle though. So in all contexts, like they were the weakest parts of my game. Right. So the long and short is so I didn't get but I never had proper training. I never had that coaching at a young age because I didn't go to the right schools, like to get the input to make sure that my passing and coaching was technically correct. I was all self-taught and then when somebody finally got to me at the age of 25, 26, it was all a little bit too late, too many bad habits, but they managed to change a lot. And I came very close to making an England tour, but I didn't. But that's life, and that's fine. But how's that shaped me since? So if you talk to anybody now about what I am like when it comes to your passing skills and their kicking skills, I am a twat because I am proper technique. It is on point. I will break it down for you. I will take you apart. I will rebuild you because you are not going to fail because of this. So, for example, you know, just recently I was in with England 18s doing a scrum half specialist camp for them, where again the best 8 under 18 9s were in, and I'm pulling them apart and putting them together. And it is almost ironic because it is do as I say, not as I did.
That's why you know it.
Yeah, 100%. So it shapes you, right? That's why Lucas is renowned as being one of the best passers and kickers in the 20s as a 17-year-old he was. Because of that, that's why Harrison is a very good passer of the ball, because that's the bit that I'm like, that's the bit that let me down. That's not going to let you down. Now, again, I've still got to help them learn and encourage and be curious about the game awareness and the game understanding, which is a little bit that came natural to me, just the natural instincts of a running game. But, you know, you like your younger experiences or your younger deficiencies do shape you when you are given the privilege and the responsibility to shape and develop younger men to try and achieve their dreams.
It makes so much sense. Look, you know, for me, and you're already a parent. I'm just a new parent right now, and you come to kind of realize how much even the style that I want to adhere to or at least I know is going to naturally come, often comes as a result of like, and it doesn't even be like, oh, I had bad parenting or good parenting. It's like there was a parenting that I received. It took me to this point. I'm happy with where I'm at. I'm good, but I could have been better. So I want to make sure that that component that I feel was maybe could have sent me over the edge, I'm going to put onto these kids in a way that hopefully can be able to send them maybe past that edge that further than where you want, because you obviously want your kids to always go further than you, or most parents do.
Yeah, 100%. 100% you do. That's the same for anybody you coach as well, right? You want to allow them to maximize their potential. And that's the whole point for me about, like, when you're mentoring, coaching, guiding, that's what you'll do. That's the role, is you've got to allow them to try and do everything they can to maximize their potential, whatever that may be. Do you know what I mean? At whatever level. So the hardest thing I ever had to do really was when I had to coach Harrison at under-8s, because I had to change everything.
Changing from dad to coach alone?
Where I couldn't do anything that I would normally do. And I had to, again, I had to understand what was important for them, not important for me, and deliver that so that they got everything they wanted out of it, because they're not trying to win the Olympics. They're just trying to have fun and get better and enjoy that experience. And so again, those types of experiences shape you and give you the diversity in coaching all types of people at all ages. And again, there's a very different experience coaching women, which again I took on a high level to learn and improve. I did England women kind of back in 2009 for again, just to get different experiences and sharpen your tools in terms of the language you need and the way that you carry your verbal language and your non-verbal language, to ensure that you give them every opportunity to, one, enjoy the game, and two, succeed. And you know, at 8 years old, enjoying is very different to Pezza and
15, 18-year-old. That's
100%.
No, I love that, and it makes perfect sense. You know, I let me ask. You know, obviously, we talk about your career as a player, and I've talked to multiple players who have turned coach, and there's always like that transition piece. There's always either I became a coach of the team that I played on, then I had to figure out how to acclimate with my teammates, going from one of the people to an authority figure. And then there's also I had to turn into a coach, but I had to shut my brain off on how I looked at it as a player versus as a teacher. For you, you obviously had the ethos of wanting to be a coach, but that's like saying I have athleticism. Who helped you to actually formulate that initial stages of being a coach, especially, I guess, with that England U20s team, which would have been teenage and young attitudes, to be able to affiliate into that measure and now be like, I got to show you, but not judge you for not doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, my journey on that was weird, because I retired from playing England Sevens, right? And I'd gone back to work in the city. So I've gone back into my day job, right? And so I wasn't
before you continue, what was your day job? Because I saw a huge gap in your timeline. I'm like, what is this corporate job that took up so much time?
Yeah. I was a child surveyor, so I worked in property. So I was a child surveyor. So that was kind of my forte. And interestingly enough, what we did. Hold on, Bill. You hear the dogs? Can you hear the dogs?
Yeah, you can hear it, but hey, they just want to be part of the show. Hey, they say, hey, man, I know about church surveying too.
There's always dogs following me around. So I was a child surveyor by trade.
Alpha life.
Because the reality is, back when I first started playing, you had to have a job as well as play, and then it went professional. So then I always knew rugby was going to end, so I'd always planned for the future. So I went back into property, and then I had such a bad experience at the World Cup 2001 Sevens in Argentina with the coach, who had lost all of us with just how he went about everything, what he had us doing. I mean, for example, we were playing 3 full contact games in the heat of the sun in Argentina against Georgia the day before we were playing in the tournament. I mean,
what the?
Yeah.
Was he trying to be like, look, there's a difference between trying to get your body ready and just destroying it before you play your biggest games?
It was nuts. It was nuts. And the reality is we were in thick acrylic training shirts and it was like 30 degrees. It was nuts. So, and we had a decent team, right? So I kind of was like, well, I'm done with this, I'm giving up anyway. My next part of life was going back into surveying and I was going to fall a line of property. But then the reality is that they advertised, so I applied for the job. I thought, I'll give that a crack. Didn't really know what I was doing, but kind of knew that I could make a difference from a pitch perspective. I was a senior man, so that transition would be easier.
Because it's an administrative to administrative kind of thing.
Because I understood how I understood how the off-pitch work because of what I did for a job.
Right.
So the long and short of it is that the reality is that I didn't get that job to start with, but they phoned me up and said, like, you've got too much knowledge. We need you in this. But by the way, can you play for one more year? To which I was like, I can't play a whole game. I can probably give you 7 minutes.
It's like, sirs, I need you to understand. I have been looking at devices and measuring land. There is no running including in this. I will die.
So I did it for a year, but I play a coach. So I did the player coach piece, which again was an interesting transition. But again, it's like anything. It's if you understand how to be flexible in your communication, you understand how to speak to people, and you actually work at that, and you understand the person you're talking to, then actually it's I don't think it's that difficult thing to do. Right. It's more in your head. It's about having honest, transparent conversations, but without ego and without intent. So I fell into coaching that way, and then I ended up staying with England Sevens, and then I left England in 2006, and that's when I went back into property. Gotcha. Because I was like, you know what, I was thinking about life and a family and earning money. So I was like, I've got to stop doing what I love doing to go and make sure I earn some proper money.
We're taking dumplings to a new level. My name is Gifte Belu. I'm here with Health Enhanced Foods, and I want to introduce you to one of our most popular products, dumpling flour. What makes our dumpling flour so popular is that it is a mix of unrefined super flours that create the maximum level of nourishment for your personal dumplings. This is including mixes like buckwheat, sunflower, flax seeds, everything that helps to be able to make your appetite stronger, more fulfilled, and healthier. Including within that, we have no added sugars, so we want to make sure that it is rich in protein, rich in fiber, and rich in vitamins and minerals. Our dumpling flour is diabetic friendly, high in quality gluten-free mixes with no rice. And if you know, there's always a little bit of rice to be able to stabilize it. Not here in our dumpling flour. It is naturally nourishing, and of course, it's a great substitute for wheat-based dumplings. With this gluten-free dumpling, you can now make your croissants, you can make your rice dumplings, you can make your dessert dumplings. You can absolutely find this at healthenhancedfoods.com. Go ahead, get yourself a bag, get yourself a pallet, and make sure that you can fulfill for your people and yourself the way that you really deserve it. Don't wait, let's go!
I feel like this is a decision so many of us have had to make. So many have to make when it comes to this, because it is. I feel even to the. I know it's England. It's a little bit easier, but I mean, even to this day, there's always that decision of like, how long do I keep trying before I have to make real decisions about this?
Yeah, it's true. I agree with you. It is, and I suppose my journey, when I look at it, is like I have always kind of been very calculated in terms of when I do face decisions, but I've always ensured that, you know, up until probably 2016, I always had multiple interests.
Options available.
Yeah, so I was driving the coaching side, but I also kept an interest in the property side. So, you know, right, even up when I was doing Kenya, I still had a property job, and when I started with USA, I had a property job because that was the nature of the way the things were and the way that I set up and being positioned in my property world was they didn't any longer want me to do the transactional stuff. They looked at me and went, actually, you're good with peoples and teams. We're going to use you to build our teams and drive our performance from behind. So again, being blunt, you're going to earn money.
Yeah, no. So you basically are creating this. I mean, you've been doing the same thing. You just happen to switch the industries.
Yes.
In basically, how do I bring the people together and then teach them how to be able to move it forward? And then, let me see how you guys run, and I'll just be there. I guess 100%. Consulting in some
and understand that again, consistency of framework, but understand the drivers that each individual wants, right? And again, in sport, most of them are driven by win or loss, right? Ultimately, but they've still got a why, which will be family and so forth. Whereas in business, it's a lot more grayer in terms of what their drivers are. But again, it's being able to amalgamate and align all of those interests into a common purpose. So that was kind of my journey through to 2016 when I had to make a decision to go one way or the other because industry life or corporate life, there was a big takeover going on. And being candid, if you wanted to be a part of that, you had to be in 100%. Or and USA were like, well, this is getting to a point where we're going this route, we're going to be 100%. So I was like, well, actually, I'm going to have to make a decision, and I made the decision and went the rugby route, and that's what I did, and that's what I have done. So yeah, I said no. This is my big thing when I talk to people as well. It's like you've got to plan for the future,
right?
You do have to be prepared to be flexible on that journey and realize, like everyone says, it's not a straight line. It's not a straight line.
Man, look, this is one part of the journey that I have known, especially in this rugby media element. It's in the US because it has no guarantees. It has no real certainty. You're building it from straight up from the multiple people that are doing it. No matter how long they've been doing it, everybody is basically still that same okay, we're trying to just see, can we eke it a little bit longer? How much longer? Can we push it a little bit longer? And you just keep trying to find a way. But what you thought would be the natural way is definitely not the way that it ends up being. And you do have to realize that there are so many errands and references that you pick up and you take and you maneuver around so that you can position yourself where you can find that, that space that you can feel the most comfortable at.
Find your place. And again, that's really, really hard for modern day rugby players because they're driven by rigidity and routine and being told, they're institutionalized, being blunt. So, and that's my whole point with with the USA boys is like that they need to be 100% committed and focused on the job in hand, right? 100%. But you've also got to encourage and give them the opportunity in the forum and the push and the prod to actually drive and create other interests and other opportunities alongside to plan and almost kind of put lifeboats out there early to develop yourself because, lads, it ain't lasting forever.
Right.
And you can't also, and a lot of them, the famous one will be, well, I want to coach. Oh, great. Okay. Well, tell me why you want to coach. Don't because I'm a good player. Well, trust me, the best players definitely don't make
the best coaches. This is so true.
And I got a great story of a coach that coached me who was, I won't say his name, but he was one of the best ever to play the game. But he was so natural and instinctive that literally, he was trying to teach us all to do a drop goal, and from 50 yards, that will probably give away who it is. And it's not a back player; it's a back row player. And he was like, "Well, just do it like this." And I'm like, "Mate, I'm not you."
I don't have the position. What are you talking about right now?
You just do it like that. And I'm like, "Mate," and that's the point. And that's not on him because he was innate. It was all instinct. That was what made him one of the best players in the world to ever play the game. So it's like, you know, and they say, well, I want to be coach because I want to stay in the game. Well, okay, you want to stay in the game, or is that because you're scared to explore what actually is out there? So again, a big part of that whole USA program was developing the individual, getting them out there to try other things. And if you want to coach, then go and coach the high school, go and coach the under-9s. Understand how you need to adjust your language and tailor down and tailor up your technical and tactical skill sessions in order to kind of be fit for purpose for that audience. Because what you can't do is take the drills and the games that I've just done with you and go, well, I'll go and do that with them.
Give it over here, man.
Which is,
you know, this is one fact that, you know, and it's interesting really that you even say that, because I do feel like, especially in American sports, there has been this definitive focus on trying to, even in the highest levels, make sure that you have your various options, especially maybe this last 8 years. Let's say arguably this last 8 years specifically, there's been an absolute focus that you need to be able to make sure that you have a couple boats that you can ride. Not necessarily just because I could fail out and go, but really it's to take advantage of what's there available to you. So, you know, I've always kind of seen, especially now at the international, and which is why, like, before we talk about like the idea of celebrity out of the rugby players, is you have a technical platform, and a platform that does distribute out everywhere you can, and internationally in some way, shape, or form. So whether or not that platform might directly monetize you or not, there's at least enough eyes and consistency where hopefully you're able to make something from that. But the key and the difficulty that always comes is, as anything else, the plan is simple. The execution is the MFer right there.
Yeah,
you know,
100%. I mean, look, if we take two case studies at the moment, you've got Kayvon and Perry, right?
Yeah.
Two fantastic rugby players, two very different personalities, but like, so my take on them, both of them could be absolutely fantastic coaches, like technically and tactically, because they've had to learn the game. They're crossovers. They've had to learn it, and they also again have the innate work ethic that they were able to transfer from their previous sports into this sport, which in itself is hard to get your head around when you think you're going to the NFL, 100,000, all of a sudden you're sleeping in your car and trying to get it done. So you've got that kind of mentality piece, but ultimately getting them to educate. Well, I look at K1 could be actually excel in the corporate world because he has a focus and a knowledge and an ability to connect with people, which allows him to bridge with anybody. So he could be really good in sales. He could be, you know, he's IT literate to a high standard, but he's also, you just look at him and you think, actually, he could be a fantastic coach because he understands people, he understands the game, but he can also deliver what's required. And that's the same when I look at Perry, is like, again, he has the scope and the capacity to become a very good coach. He's got to work on this language piece, but his value system's very high. But alongside that, when you listen to Perry and his story in terms of, let's just say, through keynote speaking and building leadership and that part of the business he could excel in, he just needs confidence, experience, and opportunities. But these are the things that are, you know, for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been trying to guide them on. Right. And like we've just said, it's very easy to say, very hard to do. And the reality is now that they're in it, but that you've got to feel uncomfortable. You've got to get comfortable feeling uncomfortable to get out of the other side. But I look at those two young men, and I think they've got fabulous futures, and the game can't afford to lose them. USA Rugby can't afford to lose them from the game. Right. But you know what?
It's like they got to be able to be in also a position where they can thrive at the next level. Like they have to be able to open up that window. And I love that you use them as examples, and because, you know, right now, and I'm jumping because normally I kind of be very sequential about this, but we'll jump back. Don't worry. Anyways, but like I love the fact that, you know, it is okay, these guys that have the ability, that there is a leverageable need that they can provide for USA Rugby as a program, because they're natural faces, they are great personalities. They have the ability to bring people in, as you've said. But at the same time, to what extent does that experience allow them to be able to grow? It's almost like you run into a ceiling. At some point, like if the movement of that company isn't growing, well, then now you're just trying to box people into this regional element. Whereas I see on this other flip side, and I want to even get your opinion on this one. I look at a person like we know Ilona Maher, right? I will arguably say that I think that she actually is going down as this current time the most famous rugby player, most famous person to play rugby actively ever. Not I played whenever I was in college, Bill Clinton, George Bush, or I played a couple games that became an actor, or I'm big within the rugby community. I'm talking about a global element that happens to play rugby simultaneously, that I actually think you're watching actually having to lift that institution of World Rugby or Rugby USA Rugby at the same time. And I see that, and it makes me happy for her, but it makes me very aggravated for the institution, because it's like you have multiple people who have been able to be in that position to do that. You can elevate your name, you can elevate your context off of these guys. There's enough evidence that's been put around there, but you don't. Like, there's something that keeps stopping it.
But I also think it's the nature of the world we live in, right? Because again, I'm not being controversial here, but she is a fabulous rugby personality.
Right.
She's a fabulous rugby personality, and she is very good at driving her platforms to create what's required to be successful. Okay, and so as a businesswoman, phenomenal.
Right.
But the reality is, when all said and done, and this is no, because she is a very good rugby player, but she's not DuPont. She's not Perry Baker. She's not the best. She's not double world player 7 year of the year. She's still got. She's for her. I think it's amazing what she's done, because she's going to elevate the game of rugby to the non-traditional watchers.
Yes.
But ultimately, we got to do a better job at unlocking and creating opportunities for our top stars on the pitch, because they sacrifice in order to try and to get where they want to get to drive things forward. Like, take Perry and Kayvon, and and this is not taking anything away from Ilona, because I love her to bits. I think she's a hard hitting badass woman that carries big and all of that. But by the same token, she's also a humble lady that would say, well, actually, but look at Portia Woodman. I mean,
right,
done it all.
That's exactly my point. Exactly. Like, you have a person that's like, the funniest thing that came out of the Olympics this year was whenever I started seeing highlight edits of Portia Woodman as a hardest hitter in rugby, and they were starting to come into mainstream, and you're just like, she's out of the game now. 10 years this has been going on. We've watched this for 10 years. I remember the earliest games, and now in this moment, because one person found a way to escape the zeitgeist of this limited rugby box that exists, and it's not because rugby. This is why I want to ask, and I'm going to contextualize this. But you see this person who is, in my opinion, number one women's rugby player all time, number 10 player all time rugby player, in my opinion. I know there's a lot of people for international rugby that will push back, but I will say, based off of all the factors around, top 10 most influential, best all time, number one, easy on the women. That's not debatable. But you have that, and it's like you didn't do much in New Zealand. Yeah, they have it, but New Zealand's a country of 8 million people. That minimal impact on a global stage, And you talk about a person like Antoine Dupont, who honestly is the only other person by metrics who has actually had a higher search rate online on Google at his time during the Rugby World Cup 2023 than Ilona. Only rugby player over the course of 10 years that has had a higher search rate. And even them, it's like, what are you guys doing? Is there like an effort to not limit? And this is the question I want to ask you. So this is where I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah.
From your perspective, from your experience, from your watch, is there, I don't want to make it sound like it's a conspiracy theory, but is there a fear from your perspective, from the internal traditional workings of rugby, that feels a fear that if there is somewhat of a tall poppy syndrome thing happening, if a player gets too big outside the system that's been created, that it can be detrimental to the success of the traditional rugby powers and their maintenance of this tiny pie that they're working on?
So I probably word it slightly differently, but in answer, I probably agree with your philosophy. The reality is, right, our game, they say, is a world game. It's a global game. It ain't a global game. It's a game that's played around the world by some countries, most of them historically, along with France, apart from France, were in the British Empire. That's the long and short of it, right? And when you look at World Rugby, with all due respect, that's the way it's kind of put together. And then they're desperately trying to hit this American market, and they're desperately trying to want to get the Asian market. But to get the Asian market, you've got to get US, and then Asia will follow. And then you've got that other dynamic is, well, what is the only true opportunity for it to be a global game? Well, the reality is 15s is not an opportunity for it to be a global game, but that's the traditional form of the game. Because when you look at the people that are going to win the World Cup, it's one of 4 people or 5 people, that's it. And the long and the short of it is, it's only because of the front 5 athletes. So, we look at 2031, right, where the big great hope is, that you've seen Scott Lawrence mission is they're going to, we're going to try and make the semi-final. You get out the group, I'll be over the moon, because the reality, like the evolution to create front 5 forwards is 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
So, and we've got the athleticism and the athletic bodies in America, but we haven't got the rugby EQ. So the only way we can go and get that rugby EQ quick enough is to go across to a nation like South Africa that has them coming out their ears and has their own issues about how they can play their front 5 athletes and their teams, and bring them over and nationalize them. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So you've got the 5th. So the only true global game is the game of sevens.
Right.
Rather than embrace that and turn that into the Billy Whiz game, like, if you look at what they've done, Test match cricket, the 5-day, right? You kind of hear about it, but you don't really. But you hear about Big Bash, you hear about T20, you hear about that, the IPL, you hear about all of that. And that's about generating, that makes big money for everybody. That's big commercial, that's big, but it's actually creating global interest. Now, that way we can create global interest in the game of rugby to then drive the participation of it is through the world of sevens. But it requires the guard, let's just call them, realizing and recognizing we are not trying to undermine or diminish the world of the 15s World Cup. That is iconic. That will always remain. But the reality is the true global key is the game of sevens. Now, if New Zealand choose to put a younger team into that, and USA want to put their best team into it, well, that's fine. They still compete. And then USA can make different decisions. New Zealand can make different decisions whenever they want to make it. But what we shouldn't be doing is kind of henpecking the one true global opportunity we have to create more Alona Mars, to make the most of Perry Bakers, which are huge opportunities within, let's just say, the USA landscape. We should be investing and driving the sevens game and creating global competitions that enable these players to make big money and drive the interest. So yes, we've got to create a fit for purpose in stadia event and a broadcasting package that works. And then we've got to find a way to leverage these stars that can be created. And I think the most important thing when we say about leveraging these stars, which is, when you look at the stars like Portia Woodman and Perry, right, they've leveraged through the rugby. Alona's a great rugby player, but the way that she's created her platform is because of her. It's down to
it was her messaging. It just happens that she plays rugby.
Yes, but she is phenomenally. I keep saying it. She's a phenomenally bright, astute businesswoman. She's so talented at being a businesswoman, and she's a decent rugby player too.
And it's the confirmation, and that's exactly kind of the thing. So I will say this. I have always been a little bit hesitant when it comes to sevens in being able to what the expanse is as it is right now, simply because of the fact that as it works in this moment, I look at like the HSBC Sevens series, and I basically see 12 teams that I watch play over and over and over and over and over again for 8 rounds until we get to a final that I ultimately have watched in some way, shape, or form 4 or 5 times prior to that. So when it comes into that, it always goes like, all right, cool. I got a full day of this one game that everybody comes and they play. And I want to do this again and again and again, but I watched this already. Like, there's only so many times I want to watch USA play South Africa, then play Canada, then play New Zealand, then play Argentina. If I've seen that in 2 or 3 tournaments, I've basically gotten it. And that's where I've always found where the bottleneck has been for sevens in its ability to be a fully monetizable, scalable global game.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was more maybe, let's say, quadrant wise, and it was like, okay, we got the tournament for North America, we got the tournament for South America, we got a tournament for all these ages, and we legitimately gave the productions, and then we have 2 or 3 tournaments that finalizes those like last big games where it's like I'm getting to see the best of these regions. They might not be the best always, but I get to see the best of these regions come together for this championship game. But then it makes sense for me, but it also makes it a much longer season. It changes the way that you can broadcast these based off of, I guess, any of these other games that are happening simultaneously. And
I think, again, interesting. Like if you look at the Formula One model, the end of the day, you watch the same race 10 times.
Right.
Okay.
I mean,
so you can
even
argue
with Formula One, they didn't really even get their bigness until they did the. I mean, don't get me wrong. For super rich people, Formula One has always been top end, and that's been a top end sport. But it wasn't until Drive to Survive that it became in the zeitgeist.
Now we're talking, right? So it's a Ben, how do you build the brand? How do you build it to create what you want to create? And I'm not saying that you're not wrong in what you've just said. Whether it's a 5-round series or a 7-round or a 4-round, or you go to, I think the regional model doesn't allow the global sport for it to develop because you don't have the opportunity to play against who you need to play against, but you need to give the opportunity for somebody to have a clear pathway, a country like India to have a clear pathway through to the World Series, which is the regional piece, which is you don't really see at the moment because I wouldn't say it's probably broadcast friendly, some of it.
Right.
But also as well, again, there's a dirty word that we dare not talk about, which is the world of gambling and the world of gaming, which drives cricket. It drives soccer. And the reality is sevens is a horse race every 7 minutes.
Right.
That's the bottom line. And I think World Rugby, again, need to, yes, that you can put things in place about being sensible around gambling, but the reality is it's there in the world, like alcohol is, like cigarettes are, it's there. So we need to embrace the commercialism to drive this. And I also think another way to make things interesting as well, Gift, is like, what about, would you pay to see Jerry Tuwai play with Perry Baker to play?
What?
Would you play for the IPL? 100% you'd play for that.
Heck yeah.
So that's a different little kind of play on it, which you could build into the season. So, because these boys and these programs, they need to run for a year, but they don't need to play for a year. But if you had a 5 or 6 month window of just World Series, then the reality is a lot of the mature countries would go part-time, which we don't want, which means that we don't necessarily get the best players. Right. And, you want to create a game where you create interest and opportunity. And for want of a word, the franchise IPL, where you see Jerry Tuwai play with Perry Baker, you see Perry Baker and Jerry Tuwai play with Roscoe Speckman, all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's a bit tasty. And it takes place at 4 venues around, then people suddenly will fly in for that. And, you can create uncertainty, you can create jeopardy in a different way, because jeopardy, when you talk about franchise, is very different to jeopardy when you're talking about playing for your country, where the best team should win. We all play for 4 rounds, and then it comes down to a lottery at the end, and then you're crowned world champions. I mean, which is basically what happened last year.
Right.
So I think there needs to be a radical rethink, but I think that's the key to globalizing and creating these opportunities in these stars that you want. Now, imagine if we created a game where we had the opportunity where a 15 star could come across. Now, they've done that. They've tried to do it. And I had an interesting kind of debate on Twitter, or X as it's called now, with a where he was saying, "Oh, you can't do it," and at the moment you can't. It's very hard to transition from 15s to sevens.
But I mean, haven't we already been? I mean, isn't that what we got for the Olympics for this year with Antoine and
we did with DuPont, right? But DuPont is the exception, not the norm. Like everybody's got to realize that's both a physical freak. Now, when you look at Fiji, which is the other nation where you had 3 or 4 that came across, but Fiji as a nation plays sevens different to the rest of the world, so that their players can naturally fall into it. They're brought up when they're 4 or 5 years old. The reality is that for most nations, there's a 6 to 8 week conditioning adjustment.
Right.
Now, that's because you run the risk of that they've got to play anywhere between 3 minutes and 14, dependent on injury. So you could create a structure whereby you create opportunity for 15 players. And we talked about this, and he talked about this, and it was an interesting concept where 15s players, let's just say Will Jordan, really good example, right? Will Jordan can come across to New Zealand, right? But you have 14-man squads, which means now you can play Will Jordan, who you know could play for 7 minutes, but probably would die if play any more than that. But you're not putting the team at risk, but now you're giving the opportunity for superstars from the 15s to jump in if they want to. Now, ultimately, what drives it is money. If Will Jordan's going to earn 300,000 New Zealand dollars playing for the Crusaders and New Zealand 15s, that's great. Or actually, he can earn 450,000 if he plays New Zealand 15s and a few for the sevens. Will Jordan's going to go, well, I'll do that, please. So
haven't we? But that's the thing. Haven't we already been seeing that even from the women's side? Like the power of like England and the Black Ferns has been basically the sevens team is the 15s teams. The sevens team is the 15s teams. They've come together, become the super 15s teams, and then they go win every bloody thing ever all the time. What
they do.
They do. Women's to the men's.
But that's the women's game. Okay. Now again, without being
explain because under the guys, I understand the factor of obviously a physical variation difference, and that might be the key. But if you can explain to me why it is so
possible in the women's and not
for women,
I think that will change, because the reality is that the physical piece in the women's game is evolving and catching up.
Okay.
Because professionalism in the men's game was 95.
Right.
We're now at 2024. So we're nearly 30 years on, right?
Yeah.
The women are probably 3 or 4 years. Well, the Red Roses and the Black Ferns are three years in.
Right. Like 2017, 2018, they just went professional, right?
You might be able to remember back. If you remember back to the World Cups 15s in 99 and the one before, USA and Canada men's were competing, and they were holding their own, right? Why were they holding their own? Because physically they were far superior to the other nations, because that's just been a part of college life in the American system, right? As soon as professionalism created, but the rugby EQ of those traditional nations was far better, so that kind of got them through, but it made it a lot closer. With every year that got by, is that those rugby mature nations who didn't take the physical conditioning to the level that they did in US and Canada, they started to do this, but USA and Canada didn't up their EQ, hence the gap just got bigger. Now, what you're going to see in the women's game, and this is where USA, women's now have a real opportunity, because their athletic ability and their talent pool is so huge. The ability on the crossover piece, because the rugby EQ is not that complex yet. With every year that goes on, France, England, and the home nations and New Zealand are pulling it away, and that's why it's able to do it right now. But I would probably say we'll look 10 years down the line, and the athletic profile will be very different. But I think sevens can enable to create those opportunities by just tweaking a little bit of rosters and so forth, to create those types of events and opportunities for players to transfer across. Now, DuPont was the exception, right? One of the fittest blokes in world rugby, 15s or 7s. Right? That's why he was able to do it. But if you looked at some of the other guys that came across, like the Australian boy that came across, he had 4 minutes in him. You looked at Hugo Keenan, who's probably one of the best fullbacks in the Northern Hemisphere. You probably don't really remember him making an impact, right?
I mean, even for whatever it's worth, I will make the argument outside of maybe the finals and even partially the semifinal, but really the finals, I don't even think Antoine Dupont was as impactful in the Olympics as you would have expected from 15s. The same guy that we watched completely take a 4-score, Stade Francais, was it Stade Francais, Toulouse team for a win in top 14, he was there and he was disruptor, and obviously he made people better, but his direct impact was not very heavy as I would have expected. He was not a one-man solo army, to say the least, when it came to the Olympics.
He wasn't, but he made big momentum moments happen when he came on as a sub. When he started, he struggled. And if you think about when he in that Toulouse top 14 stuff, where he got 3 or 4 turnovers, that was as a direct result of what he'd been doing in the sevens, where he'd been working on those individual skills. And he was like, well, he's just you're mentally just sharper and quicker because the game is so much slower at 15s than sevens.
Right.
So and that's why it's easy to go back from sevens to 15s, especially if you're a player like Dupont. And these highly talented players that play in the 15s, the difference is obviously like the backs have got a better chance of shifting, but they do have to drop a little bit. They do have to drop a little bit of weight. It wouldn't really suit the big front fivers and all of that. But I just think we could be smarter, we could be more innovative, but we also have to realize that by doing that, we're not attacking the traditional form of the game. Right. The traditional form of the game is a Rugby World Cup 15s. That's what creates all of, it's a wonderful commercial machine as well, blah, blah, blah.
Right. And it's the budget for World Rugby. It's ultimately the budget for World Rugby.
But the research and development vehicle is the game of sevens. That could cost you money, but that could end up making you a load of money. But you also have to be prepared to be innovative and embrace things that are in the world that have always been in the world, that for some reason you're not. Again, you come back to the value system. Why wouldn't we embrace gambling?
Right. I mean, this is one of those situations where I could understand maybe the hesitancy on gambling, and maybe this is because from the NFL and the NBA, there was so much pushback until basically the last 5 years, and I feel like sports has basically been upheld by TV deals and gambling, and really gambling is upholding TV deals, which is upholding sports.
Yeah, but it's been around since they began, right?
True story. I mean, it's always there, but we're talking about now not having to be in the seedy backgrounds with the guy with the cigarette in the alley. Now you actually can be up front with it.
When we go to when everybody goes to the game at Twickenham, they all sit at their corporate tables and they all predict the scores and they put $20 in the middle and the winner takes all. I mean,
exactly.
It's happening. So I don't understand why. In this world where we have to commercialize and monetize, and we've got such a fabulous high octane sport which ticks all the boxes, that we wouldn't embrace that to drive and deliver the participation piece, which is what it's ultimately about. It's about delivering the ability for resources to deliver to the next 5 or 6 year old, the 7 or 8 year old that's going to be the next Antoine Dupont, that's going to be the next Marcus Smith. That's what we're, the next Alona Mar, the next Perry Baker. We got to do that. And if we don't innovate, we don't move forward, then we do run the risk of dying and withering on the vine.
Which is where it feels like we're very much as
feels like that to me.
Feels like it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm worried.
Let me ask you this. Obviously, here in the U.S., I would argue that you probably have the potential to have the highest level of sponsorship capabilities in most amount of companies. Obviously, the pool of money is bigger. The access is harder because everybody and their mom is trying to go after it. But it is. So, in the time as U.S. Rugby and in your time with U.S. Rugby, and you get past 2016 Olympics where we finally break through, and clearly the numbers are working, that they're willing to bring this thing back again. And then obviously bring it back a third, because seeing what happened with breakdancing, I really didn't realize that we could have lost rugby in the Olympics if it had not gone well in Rio. But when it ultimately comes to like trying to talk to the money people, you've talked about ad nauseum about how the Golden Eagles were so integral to the maintenance of USA Rugby Sevens team. But what was going on? What, as an administrator, what was the process? And this is, again, I'm a person, I know how hard it is to go get sponsors. But what made it so difficult to be able to attract the people that are connected with the Olympic, rugby community, but also like attach into the global name of this sport?
What, in USA Rugby, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So here you go. I mean, the long and the short of it is this, right? You had the Golden Eagles, who were, for all intents and purposes, they're a high wealth group that are extremely successful businessmen,
right,
in their own right, and all have a black book with a load of other mates in them that are extremely successful businessmen.
Right.
And they all know movers and shakers at all these top corporates and things like that, right? But then but rather than embrace that and work with them and give them commitment and confidence that the money will be fed into the high performance programs, as well as the participation piece to drive the game and give the players and create the opportunities, they had to deal with a leadership group that weren't fit for purpose. And that leadership group took us into bankruptcy.
Right.
And then even bizarrely, we're given the responsibility to take us out of bankruptcy, which they never did. They just left us kind of spinning and getting by. My last 4 or 5 years since 20 was literally, if I didn't do it, it didn't get done. And then you had a board, and the board, like if you're on a board in the US, you either go get it, or you write a check, or you get off. And they didn't do any of that. And rather than embrace and commercialize, which is normally what you attract with American, is there was some divisive parts of it. There's some good parts. They've got good people like on high school and youth who are trying to drive it at that level and have a real interest and desire for the youth of the game to move forward. But they become self-sufficient because that's pay for play, right?
Right.
But little Johnny and little Sarah needs tenfold Perry Bakers and tenfold Ilona Miles at the top of the game to aspire to
be able to say this is who we can be. Yeah.
High school youth, but then you've got all that internal fighting going on at colleges, and that's at board level. You've got the board not functional and driving with commercial vision and ideology to get it done, and then you've got a senior leadership team, Ross Young, Jonathan Atkinson, who couldn't run a bath. So for me, with my business background, and I'm running a program, I'm like, well, where are our revenues coming from? Because commercially, USA Rugby are delivering nothing for us. And I ended up having some very frank discussions, which got me in trouble several times. But the reality is, it's not you. What you can't do is what you can't do with people like Golden Eagles, who are very, very wealthy, smart businessmen, is they're very generous until somebody thinks they're taking the piss out of them. And then they pack up and they go home because they're like, you know what? Like you're taking.
I don't need this.
Well, you're taking advantage of us. We're smart businessmen, and now you're disrespecting. If you disrespect successful businessmen, that normally ends in a bad way. So for the last 10 years, the Golden Eagles have supported the men's program and the women's program. People forget that. The USA Rugby fell away on the women's program. The Golden Eagles picked up the slack. The board,
that's even with the 15s, because I remember there was a point where the women's 15s were paying to play 15s national team.
But again, the Golden Eagles mantra was always the sevens, and it wasn't 15. It wasn't the 15s. But the reality is, why was that being allowed to happen? So then, rugby are investing, but the reality is that's not the type of money that we need to create other opportunities. But the commercial structure, the drive, the vision, and the board individuals that were on there for the wrong reasons. They were driving personal agendas for their little bit rather than the big vision agenda, meant that it was very shallow-minded, very small-minded, and we didn't get where we needed to get to. We ended up in bankruptcy through mismanagement. Money was being misallocated or whatever. but we still managed to keep the show on the road, and we got to Tokyo. And then after Tokyo, we had massive rebuilds with little to no investment from the union, $0 to $50,000 basically, and everything else picked around that. So, you know, the other thing that when you look at the American landscape, which is interesting, right? So again, this is not disrespectful to the American landscape, but the reality is they love success. So you saw the immediate thing when we were riding high, number 2 in the world, going for the World Series. There was a lot of hullabaloo around us and things like that.
Right.
When the girls win the bronze, all of a sudden there's a Kang. There's your $4 million. There's your, and it's like,
of course, ready to go.
What about the 10 million that the Golden Eagles have got? Nobody's thanked them.
Yeah.
You're on this bandwagon with Kang, and well done, Kang, brilliant. But imagine if Kang had come in and go, "There's 4 million for the men's program." What would have been the first response? Would have been, "Well, what about the women?"
Yeah.
That hasn't happened the other way around. Now, you know, let's hope that there is somebody that's prepared to come forward and match that on the men's side. But you know, there's a very reactive approach by USA Rugby rather than a proactive approach, and I think World Rugby are trying to impose themselves and filter into the structure, but it's between a rock and a hard place, and it's going nowhere.
They're the wheat flour that you can eat. My name is GiftTime in Baylor. I'm here with Health Enhanced Foods. And I want to tell you about one of our best and most beloved products, our sweet white wheat baking mix. Now, this is the baking mix for those who are not really looking for something that's gluten-free, but they are looking for something that they can eat that is going to still be healthy and is not going to be dangerous. White flour is typically a very processed, incredibly bleached flour, and it's not good for you. It's incredibly cheap for a reason. Our sweet white wheat bread mix is whole grain, dairy-free, high in dietary fiber, free of additives, and is absolutely unprocessed and unrefined. With our sweet white wheat bread mix, you can feel like you're getting all the same rewards that you would get from poor white bread, but with all the nutritional value. You're able to still make your bread loaves or your cakes, your flat bread or your cookies, but you don't have to feel like you are going to be robbing yourself of good carbohydrates. You can get the sweet white wheat bread mix from healthenhancedfoods.com. Absolutely go impress your friends and family with the greatest bread while not making them feel like they have to be gluten-free at the same time. No dangers, full body pleasures. Go ahead and get yours today. Let's go.
Do you, and you know, it's as you say it, I'm thinking like, is this like a generational problem? Like, what I mean is like, there has been, you know, a lot of the guys that have been, and not from the Golden Eagles, but have been into these positions. You had guys like your former coach, I didn't realize, Nigel Melville, who's really the crux where all this went to collapse in a sense. I'll put it like that kindly. But like, you know, but then you have these new guys that come in that all come from this same system that rugby has felt this weight on, where it's like, find the rich people, let them fund, don't worry about profits, don't worry about trying to do anything new, kind of keep this, like, if you keep spending money, then eventually you can keep spending money and hopefully that people just get happy with results. Whereas, you know, where I always had believed that within the US, the idea, because sports is so integral to our economy, it's not just a playground anymore. It is a billion-dollar, multiple billion-dollar, borderline trillion-dollar industry that requires profits at some period of time. But I wonder if this mentality comes from, I've seen what Premiership Rugby does, I want to copy that. I look at Premier Soccer, Premier Football, and go, oh, I want to copy that because they seem to be churning on, but it misses the integral nuance, because again, you never had to look at it. You just saw it exist.
Yeah, I mean, look, Premiership rugby here. I mean, that's under the pump. So
Right, exactly.
I mean, and you look at MLR, right? I mean, that being candid is there's a lot of owners putting in a lot of investment. So I think the reality is like what do you? I think the key is what do you see as the return on investment, right? Is it profit or is it results? And ultimately, you know, the big thing about America, which is different to say the UK, where they've got a stadium as a home and that they can generate revenues from that and they own it. In the States, you know, if you look at the NFL, they've all got stadiums.
Own all the stadiums, right? NBA own all the stadiums.
And so you in order to build your revenue is to get people to come and watch your team. Now the challenge you have nationally in the USA is it's a very big place. So
a little bit of land space, you know, and then a few thousand miles.
It's all chicken and egg because ultimately you need money to buy a stadium. So you know, it isn't easy. It isn't straightforward. But I do think the model is that even when you look at England and things like that, grassroots pays for itself. It's pay for play, right? But what happens is that the club ends up paying a dues back into the union that then pay it back. So this whole kind of due system that appears in USA Rugby, it's the same around the world. You know, there's every club membership that a player plays. So I'll play a non-club paying membership to Bromley, my local club.
Right.
Bromley will pay a chunk of that to the RFU. So, but the other thing I always kind of struggle with a little bit in the USA is that, and this is the nuance of rugby is it's very much a community game. It's the rugby community, but in order to do that, I think this is my opinion. Successfully, you need a home. So in England, everybody's got a clubhouse.
Right.
That's not common and that's not normal in the American landscape, right? Because of the pitch hire and you know, it might be a bar in town, but ultimately, like the clubhouse, like Bromley, everybody buys a beer there.
That goes into the system of
the ecosystem. So it means that the community clubs can thrive and build and can build their own revenues.
Right.
So again, there's less animosity about paying away to the union.
It's like it's okay. We're paying up. At least we already know we got something that's holding us here.
Yes. And ultimately, you've got a common goal wherever it comes to, right? So I haven't been to Bromley for 12 months. I walk in, the bar's open, somebody's there. All right, Mike. So you've got an immediate attachment.
Yeah.
And, you know, that is a big part of the rugby ethos. And I think that's a challenge that we haven't nailed in the US. You know, I look at some of the clubs, you know, a good one, that Danny Barrett's old club, Treasure Island in San Francisco, they've got their own. And you can see that works. And, you know, in France, there's a mixture of grassroots. They have bars in the town. So I'm not saying it's not insurmountable, but I think these nuances shouldn't be, they can't be taken for granted. They're big parts of trying to make people belong, that makes rugby different.
You know, and I think it makes absolute complete sense to me. And basically, there's always at least a product that's being sold, which is why I think it, you know, again, I mentioned before the idea of like the reason why Formula One got so close to regular average people and not the ultra wealthy was this documentary series that allowed people to look behind the scenes, and then I get to see the race, and now I have a connection piece. It's always been a content game. I think with the US, when it comes to sports, it's entertainment, right? You have to sell entertainment first and foremost. If you don't have property, you sell entertainment. You sell the merch, you sell the content, you sell the idea to be able to create the connection. When you guys were doing things like I think like the shows, the recruiting shows to be able to play for the Olympic team or
Pioneers and all of that stuff.
Exactly like that. For you, did you see not whether it worked or not? That's neither here nor there, but a value system that people were connecting with at the administrative level that was like, guys, like focus in here. Like this might be something here. or was it just like, all right, you guys are just kind of like shooting the shit on stuff? You're just throwing darts against a wall, slime against a wall, and hoping something sticks.
But all of that pioneer stuff was driven by me and us, not by USA Rugby. So this is the point, right?
Yes.
And they were like, well, there's nothing to do. There's not, And then when it started to then they jumped on the bandwagon. And that was originally the original pioneers was on the boys, and then it gravitated. Then we brought the girls in, and so forth. And HSBC wanted to do it on us after they done Fiji because they saw us. But more importantly, the reason I was so up for this and was prepared to allow them in was I wanted to share the boys' stories to inspire the next K1, the next Perry, right? Because look, let's not beat around the bush, right? In America, rugby historically was middle-class white dudes from college.
Historically, it still is.
But the bottom line is that's not the makeup of this country. That won't connect with this country. And that's my big issue with, when I talked about Kerry and Kayvon and Perry as being, real proper potential international coaches of the future, because they're not from the traditional makeup. And they speak the language, and they can hit a lot of levels in terms of they can hit the middle class white kids from colleges as well as the crossovers,
lower income,
and the low economic people, and they understand the islander mentality, and so forth. And until we start recognizing that, we've got an issue, because the long and the short is we do have a coach development issue and a coach development framework issue within the country, but it's an issue that needs to be addressed and sorted out, because otherwise the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome.
Expecting a different result.
You are seeing that, like on this, and again, just looking through the I'm going to be controversial here as well, looking through the recruitment process to replace me, right?
Yeah.
Like the number of names that were coming up, they were just chugging it. Oh, be it not who's the right man for the job. I think they've got the right man for the job.
Yeah,
100% they've got the right man for the job. But the first one was, oh, that's just like having Friday again. No, you're getting a bloke who has a strong value system, will do it differently to me and in his own way, but also highly knowledgeable and highly driven to get stuff done. The names that you're chucking out of me are just romance, or he was at college with me, or like, mate, it's nuts.
You know what's funny? Like, I swear this thing, I'm sorry, I always bring the NFL in because this is the one where it has the most like parallel, in my opinion. But I remember they did this with a coach where the guy who was the coach for the LA Rams, everybody tried to find a variation of him. Now, mind you, this is a guy that had been coaching since he was 22 years old in Sean McVay. 22 years old, he's been coaching. He got to be a head coach by 30 and is basically a savant in his own game. So you're not going to ever find him. You're just going to find they're trying to find variations. Yeah. So when it goes to, as you talk like, oh, they're just finding, guys who are in proximity to your pathway, as if that is the exact pathway to maintain. I do find it funny because it's like, what is it that you are trying to build? And I guess maybe from your side, from a club side, like, what is it that USA Rugby administration, and the sad part is I know some of these people that are there. From an individual standpoint, everybody seems to make sense, but it feels like this is Men in Black, the collective, the individual is sane, logical, objective, and is calm-minded, but the group is wild, out of control, and loses their mind. What is the objective that's being presented as the intent for this system, this program? Like, what are we trying to be?
Yeah, I genuinely don't know. It's too much, being blunt, it's too many politics, and there's too many people that are not aligned to the goal, and they're more interested in getting one up on somebody or forming alliances because it's in their interest to form alliances, right, rather than stripping it right back. What's the mission? Who's the best person? Who are the best people for the mission? Well, I don't particularly like him. That wasn't the question I asked. I asked you, what's the best person for the mission? Is he a good character? Yes, he is. Is he going to agree with you? No, he's not the whole time. Well, okay. Well, then that's about having robust debate, Revoke.
Right.
You know, do you want to get if you want to
Can we get objective about this? Let us give us pure objectivity.
You want to get shit done. You don't want everybody to agree, because otherwise, you know, and that is the issue with USA Rugby, and you know that is where people challenge the norm with rationale, with objectivity. Then it doesn't suit their narrative, so they go a different route. And you know, I lived it so long with so many of those board members where it was comedy, and some of these vocal people who worryingly actually hold quite a bit of power or a little bit of influence. You're like, how have you even got there? And that's the most worrying thing, because they're not in it for the right reasons.
Right. They're there because it feels like well, let's talk about this. Some of the universities, sometimes people, once they get into a position, especially when you can't get fired, it's they create kingdoms, and like this area is their kingdom and they must maintain this kingdom. But the ironic part is, you would think, hey, if you want to maintain your kingdom, you want everything to be good so that you elevate more. Like, you gain more riches as a result of getting other people riches, but you seem to just want to retain everything for yourself, and then nobody grows and you don't grow and really get hurt. But
they're saying, isn't it, you should hire giants. You hire giants, because if you hire giants, then that will make you grow, push you on, but ultimately it morphs you into escalating yourself, and also frees you up to do other things. Again, you need to be confident in how you add value and what you bring, and I think that is the crux of it as well, that a lot of these people, what value are they bringing? What are they adding? Have they lost their way? You know, there might have been really great people up there, but then they got caught up in, like all things. This is an old adage from Kenya. It makes me giggle. Is that in Kenya years ago when I did Kenya, I'll share this story because it still makes me giggle to this day.
I love it.
It didn't make me giggle at the time, but it made me giggle.
In hindsight, you know,
with players, right? They're all like, you know, but and they don't want, they just really, really good men. But the way it works in Kenya is you work your way up the tree, right? And then when you're a director, right, the director gets looked after first.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's like anything's like, I'll sign that off, but what's what makes me sign it for you? So all of that goes on, right? So I was sat in this board meeting where a couple of these Kenyan directors have been trying to sabotage our own program because we were doing too successful, and they weren't getting any shine, to the point where they've been sabotaging us for 4 months. We finally caught them out, and I'm in the board meeting, and I'm like, we sit there like that, and in the end, he goes, "Well, yeah, no, I did do that. Yeah, no, I'm wrong like that. I'm sorry." So I'm like, right. So I look around and go, "Well, he's admitted this now, right? He's off it. He's gone, and he's out there." And all the board members went, no, that's fine. He said sorry. He said, that's enough. We move on. We don't cry over spilled milk. And I'm like, you what? And it was like, again, it was like, wow, okay, we don't want to set the apple cart. Once you become a director, it's almost the norm it's like the cake's so big, but there's always a couple of slices missing when it gets to you.
Right.
and I've seen it where people were great, and as soon as they become a director, they switch.
Just switches out. Something about that intoxication of power.
100%. So I look at what happens in USA, and they might have been really great people on the way up, but then when they get there, then they think, shit, I need to do this to stay in it, rather than what's the mission, what's the vision, how am I adding value, where are we trying to take this ship? Now that takes strong leadership from the CEO and the COO and the chairman. Now the new crew in, let's see what they're going to do. Right. The old crew, I ain't got a lot good to say.
Right. Let me ask you, and I mentioned this before, and you didn't say much, but I did want to ask, like, Nigel brought you in. This was a guy that coached you. Obviously, the opportunity presented, but there was a lot of controversy around him, especially leading into that 2018 bankruptcy off of the pseudo rugby commercial entity BS nonsense.
Yeah.
How was your perspective,
of all of that.
through that, considering the personal relationship you guys had previously.
No. We had. I mean, Nigel brought me in. He tried to bring me in a year earlier, but I wouldn't come. I couldn't come because the board didn't want a foreigner. They wanted an American.
As
So
an American.
it nearly went wrong, and then it was like, well, we need to get him in.
Right.
We need to get somebody in, and then they got me in, right. So that was 2015, right? Nigel left before Rio, so he left at the start of 2016.
Wait, I thought he was still there through 2018.
No, he left in 2016 and went to the RFU. So this is the point, right? People have tailored the thing because when he told me he was going, I was like, Nigel, you've just made me. I've just signed him for 2 years, and you're going back to England because he had to go back because of his parents. His parents were getting old, right? So he still did put Rim in place.
Yeah,
okay?
Rim. That was
Rim in place, and he put in Chang to get, who was the San Francisco guy who was on the board, to take the World Cup to 2000 and San Francisco, right? So he did all that before. So again, that bit. That Rim and all of that. So that was set up. And, there was some very clever businessmen in that, in terms of who had put equity in. By the time we got to 2018, and what happened in San Francisco, where we had to be bailed out, is because whoever was the CEO and whoever was driving that commercial piece, they didn't have the rigor on the board members, Chang and all that, in terms of what was happening and how the tender for the hotels, how the stadium hire and all of that was dealt with. Because if you actually look at the actual event, it's probably one of the most successful World Cup events in terms of attendance and everything else that we'd ever seen. They sold out.
I remember people were asking me how to be able to get hotels and connections going into that.
It was nuts how successful. I mean, it sold out. It was brilliant. But we didn't make any money. Now, the people at the stadium made a bucket load of money.
Right.
And World Rugby had to prop up the costs on the hotels because they didn't do a city deal and all of that stuff. That's where that kind of organization fell down. Now, I don't think that, being candid, whether that's at Nigel's door or not, I don't know. But he'd already flown the nest by then. That then set us on our route to 2019, 2020 in terms of when we did go bankrupt on all the finances. Right. But again, our rigor from our CEO. So then Ross Young came in 2019,
right?
19. No, I think he was earlier than that because it was Dan Payne. Dan Payne did 18 months.
Right.
So
okay.
So I'm not sure Dan Payne made it to the World Cup. I think Ross was in all around then.
Yeah.
He's inherited that. But by then, there was no rigor to sort out and get the financials and the books in order. So they were robbing from Peter to pay Paul. They were taking money from the high performance to keep head office. So as a consequence, then it all, like my money was disappearing went missing. And I'm like, where's that gone? Oh, that got allocated. I was, well, hold on a minute, but that was Golden Eagle money that was allocated to the Sevens. Right. So we had all of that kind of unsavory stuff going on whilst Rim was being wound up because that was overspending. And that was, again, commercially, those people weren't competent enough to deal with rugby, to where we ended up going into bankruptcy, which was, again, if when all said and done, the signs were there for senior leadership, but they did nothing.
Right.
And then the people that took us out of bankruptcy, again, which was Ross and Atkinson and board members like Santinelli and that, again, just ridiculous. Just no idea. So, there's myself on the 7 side, there's Gary Gold on the 15 side, and we're like, how have we got here? And it was just, they all stood in a circle and just pointed to the bloke to the left. So, which for us in our area, if we did that in our high performance field,
you'd be gone immediately. Yeah.
and the reality is because we challenged them, the foreigners are kicking off, and you know how the narratives can be spun in the USA rugby landscape. And
Very.
let's say it's hugely gossip driven, and it's amazing how much from board level seems to filter out into the rugby community and the landscape. And so yeah, it's a shame really, until that rigor and that whole process is tightened up. It's the definition of madness.
Once again makes a lot of sense. And look, as one that always heard it, so I always say, whenever I entered into the rugby media space, I began to have a different level of empathy when it comes to how communication gets done. Because when you look from the outside in, they are living large up at the top, and everybody's just kind of dealing with what the bull BS that they have to go deal with, right? Yeah. And so you don't know what it's going through. But then when you start entering in, you start getting to conversations, you still see all the stuff that's happening. So when you talk about like the leakages from the board members that find themselves onto the internet, whether it's Facebook primarily first, and then a Reddit, and then to Instagram, but really Facebook, like very much Facebook first, you start to be like, well, these things aren't matching up exactly. And I don't know if we're getting a full story, but you have to sit back and watch, because it's like, it's not worth arguing with people on. And everybody does have a theory, and everybody knows a person that knows a person who's part of that entity. So it's like you said, the rumor mill and the spin starts to go. So like that, especially with the coaching, with after I think like for 15s, you had Mike Tolkien, and then it's like everybody's been from somewhere else. It was John Mitchell, then yourself, then Gary Gold, and even who was formerly for the women's sevens before leaving. And I think he was even American. And you're just like, oh, there we go. Like, we just don't know. Nothing seems to be working. What's going on? Are we getting the leftovers? And I do feel that, for whatever it's worth, you were always kept on the side that you're the one that works, and then everybody else seems to be just, this is a burning fire that's going through, right?
But it was a burning fire. But here's the thing, right? My job is to protect those 20, 25 boys. Yeah. And that's where, I've learned that from what I had to do in Kenya and things like that. I mean, dealing with burning fire, learn that in Kenya. I learned a lot in Kenya, because the boys were very wise, because they understood how the landscape worked in Africa. Because Africa is it's
a wild west. It's very wild west.
It's more wild west than America, but in a very different way, right? I mean, it is tribal, but it's fucking medieval. It's medieval in terms of it's cruel. It can be really hard. It's a harsh world. Kenya, it's a harsh world you live in. And when I look at America's first world problems in Africa and Kenya, they're real problems. So they taught me a lot of good lessons there that were transferable into the USA in dealing with this. But it was very clear for me that when we went through all that bankruptcy stuff, it's my job is to protect these 20, 25 players, which we did a really good job with. And the Golden Eagles ensured that was the case. Yeah. But the people that were really hurting that was the staff, because they had to carry the burden as well. Like, we all had to carry the burden, and I had to keep telling them, you have to. I know it's not fair, but life isn't fair. But you've got to look at the bigger picture, and we will get through this, and we will get out the other side. But the assistance from senior leadership and the board, honestly, I've got no respect really, and if I'm honest with you, that continued for the next 4 years, because then there was no sense to change. There was no sense to it was like, we'll just bumble along and we'll find a way. And the problem is that what we did in the Sevens is we always found a solution, and that probably meant that we were our own worst enemies in terms of this. Did we let the house burn down? And then, well, if we let the house burn down, then there'll be no house. I mean, that's basically it. And so we didn't. We fought, we scraped, we fell out, and we challenged to get where we needed to get to, whilst we were evolving a squad. it's going to make it very interesting for the next 4 years, I think. And I truly hope that there is consistency and real support, because
you know, and as you say that, it's what worries me the most, because in these next 4 years, this is going to be finally LA 2028, which 2016 might have been, let's put rugby seven, and I'm going to call it putting rugby sevens on the map from a traditional and non-traditional stance. Not that it wasn't there before, but put it there. 2021 obviously was a bit of a, deviation.
Yeah.
Right. And then 2024, I think, really reset this back
100%.
so that all the pressure now is that performance in 2028 can make or break the rest of the rugby program moving forward. And I'm not just saying the sevens program, I mean the rugby program.
I agree.
Because I don't know if 2031 is able to facilitate. I want to ask you this in ranking, but first I'll contextualize. I don't know if the Rugby World Cup is actually as important as the Olympics at this point. In my opinion, traditionally,
or for world,
I'm talking about globally.
Yeah.
I ain't talking about globally. USA for sure, but globally. Yeah. Because Rugby World Cup, I get it. It's huge, but that's within the rugby community. I don't know if the numbers are actually even real, that 400 million watch. I'm always iffy with how they measure these. But, like, it is important, but the Olympics changes lives. Like that, in my opinion. So for you, in your opinion, between HSBC Sevens championships, Rugby World Cup Sevens, Olympics, and then I'll throw Rugby World Cup 15s, where do you see the order of influence and impact?
So I think Rugby World Cup Sevens has had its day. I think we don't need that because we've got the Olympics, and I think that's the pinnacle every 4 years, not the Rugby World Cup. I think the World Series is your annual event. You need that that's the equivalent of your Six Nations and your rugby championship. We need that, but
keeps it in the zeitgeist of the mind.
Ensures the development of nations, because we want to create a global. And what we need the World Series, and we need the Division 2, the Challenger Series to be proper, so that we can have that churn, and we can have that promotion relegation, we can have that jeopardy, because everybody's interested in the bottom as well as the top in order to get there. And it also means that newer nations can grow. So I think that's important. And I think we need to make that that needs to at least break even.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the Olympic piece is huge. That's the pinnacle. It's the eyeballs. And I think that opens the doors to non-rugby audiences. And that's the most critical piece, because that opens eyeballs, that opens corporate dollars. And we're already making, World Rugby get a decent payaway on the eyeballs that watch the Olympics in sevens every year for the next 4 years. Off those numbers, they will get given a check every year as compensation for that. But that check hopefully will ensure that goes towards the delta on the World Series Sevens to make sure we get that moving, to allow the countries to grow it, right? So that's at a kind of a macro ecosystem level. In terms of, say, like, what then you have to work out is where do these individual countries, nations, put their money, because they've only got a finite amount of money themselves, and where are the opportunities in sport? And I think that's where there's an interesting dynamic going on at the moment. Flipping to the World Cup 15s, that's a cash cow, a moneymaker. Right. So that is the foundation for World Rugby, right? So they want 31 because they want the American corporates, right? That's what they want. So the longest,
it's the gold mine. I feel like that's the only reason why the US has been put into the focus. We're the gold mine.
But the participation piece in the American landscape is tough, right? But each country has got in order to compete, if you're the top countries like New Zealand, England, and France, you're having to pay a lot of money for those players domestically to keep them alive, which is why the premiership's under the pump. Top 14 is working. That's why the Super 14 is struggling and all that, right? But the international game is strong, but you need the domestic tournament to feed the players there. The opportunities in the game ultimately is the women's space. Yeah. So you're seeing a lot of women's 15s money going into that. Now, they can't, if the money's going in there, it's got to come from somewhere. So if they haven't got extra money, it's going to come from other programs.
Right.
So where are those other programs it's going to come from? Probably their sevens programs or their age grade programs. So all of a sudden they're having to make different decisions, which rather than create more money, they're cost cutting. So it's the old thing when you're in business, right? They're not growing the top line.
Right. They're just slicing. We're not taking the pie. We're just slicing that little piece up into more and more pieces.
So my big issue or my big concern in the sevens in the USA is that they'll look at that strategically and go, do you know what? We're going to put all of our eggs into women's sevens.
Yeah,
because that's bang for our buck. And the reality is like, what does that mean for the men's sevens?
Right.
And that's the scary bit for me, is that because there's a huge opportunity for a gold in the women's, potentially, depending on what happens with their squad, because I don't know how many of them are staying and going. But on the men's side, they're 2 years into a 6-year cycle. If they keep this squad together and they really invest, they could be real contenders.
Right. Which ironically could be an even bigger payday as well.
Yes, but you've got to speculate to accumulate, and it's whether or not they're prepared to do that. So I think there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things going on which can upset the dynamic. But women's sport is a huge opportunity, but we need to grow the pie rather than cut the pie and reallocate. And I think that's the opportunity that we need to look at, and that's my biggest concern, because I'm fearful going into this next quad. Not just for the USA Sevens, because I look at what happened to Canada post 16 when the women's won the bronze, what happened to their men's program,
and then that drop, just precipitous drop.
Yeah, and then it's really hard to find your way back. So I think it's an interesting dynamic for everybody to consider. And it's not just a USA issue, right? Yeah, I think it's going on across the globe. You look at what happened in England, where England, Scotland, and Wales became Team GB, and the rugby fraternity don't associate themselves with Team GB. If they call themselves if they call themselves the British Lions, probably they get a bigger buy-in. But again, that's marketing. That's being smart. And I think, these are where, as I said, World Rugby need to be innovative, creative, and embrace the new age, like you've just talked about, throw money and invest on an equivalent of Drive to Survive, and promote and create stars that leverage like Low has and so forth, and embrace aspects of the game that, are so-called dirty.
Right. The gambling dirty. That's still so funny. But no, I fully agree. I fully agree. Before I let you go, I just want to ask, one final thing. As you've taken your step back from USA Sevens rugby, what does the future for Mike Friday look like, moving forward? Because I just need to say, like, if you don't have a book deal getting ready to try and set something up, I need you to do like we just talked. Leverage your platform. Your story is important.
Yeah. Well, it seems that somebody mentioned me, would you do a book? And I was like, I'm not very good at writing. So I don't know. Well, I might do that. But I mean, the reality for me, for the next 2 years, like the most important thing for me, which is why I stepped back and I stepped away, is because I need to be, like, I was in the USA like full time pretty much as people didn't think I was. I was there for 4 weeks out of 4.5. I come back between tours just to see my 2 sons and my partner Rachel. So the reality is that for these next 2 years, I've got Lucas just starting off at Queen's for the next 2 years. I've got Harrison coming out of university. He's starting work. I need to be in this geography more for them rather than where I've been the last. So, I could have jumped out the frying pan in the fire and gone back on to the World Series with another team, but it's the wrong. It's in the wrong geography. So I need to do that. I need to put other people first for the next 2 years. It does not. I don't want to be in the game. I do. I want to be either in high performance, the man behind the man, I would get back at the coal face. I would get into this commercial space. But you know, in 2 years' time, if I'm not doing anything or I'm not doing what I want, then I might get back into the cold face. I really am kind of taking this time to be open and embrace the unknown, right? And get comfortable being uncomfortable. Kind of what I've told Kayvon and Perry that they need to realize. I've got to live by that myself, but it's not easy. I won't hide that. And now you're the second person that's talked about a book deal. Maybe I will.
I told this to Naya as well too. I was like, look, there's certain things that you just have, but you know, to your point, it makes all the sense in the world. One, again, I'm now coming to this realization as a new family person, like having your own, especially with the kids. There is a finite amount of time that you have at these specific developmental points, and you know, you need to be able to take advantage. And as ambitious as we can be, you know, thankfully the ambition will always be there. But the time period to be insular with those close to you is not always there, especially if you've done a lot. Like, I feel like you've earned this time. Yeah. So I feel like there's no disclaimer needed. You don't have to be like, I do want to go back. No, just be like, I'm with my family. All right. I don't have
to. The only reason I put a disclaimer is that 3 months down the line, I'll be like, Jesus Christ, I can't.
True.
Yeah. But the last 6 years, they've been really, they've had that development, they've had that touch, but they've been within their school environment and their university environment. So I know that they've been safe and contained. Now they're in the big bad world, right? I mean, like I said to the boys, like the world ain't fair. Like we used to have a big plaque that says, you know, the world, life's not fair. It's like, you know, not the lion not eating you because you didn't eat him. The lion's going to eat you. End of. So, you know, like we've got and you don't know what you don't know when you're 21, right? You're young and dumb and so forth. So yeah, it is an important time.
Man, hey, look, man, you got this, man. Don't worry. The crazy will come in and then it'll seep out. It'll just you got to give yourself the solid 7 months, not 6, 7 months. The hard one is you get yourself in. Mike, man, I want to thank you so much again for being on the show and just having the conversation. I genuinely enjoyed this, and I hope we get a chance to do this again in the future with maybe more nuance. We won't go into your full backstory. We'll just talk to that. But genuinely, I'm glad to have learned more and to have better context than I ever would have had before, and I appreciate it. And all that you've done is legitimately legacy worthy. So I hope at whatever the criticisms has been, you know that you have actually set a genuine historical measure for rugby as well as rugby in the US.
Oh no, I had a great fun, friends and foes. It was all good fun. I got small man syndrome. I love a fight.
Let's go. Do it. All right, Mike, until next time.
Cheers. All good.
Mike, man, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show. Thank you for continuing to be a major impact in rugby on and off the field. Thank you guys all for taking the time to listen to the show, take time for putting it all together and continue to engage and help this grow more and more. This has been a very, very long process of wanting to build a rugby media that presents a mentally helpful and perspective version of rugby, and there's still a very long way to go. But I enjoy and appreciate every single one of you for being on here. And of course, please, if you guys get a chance, check out some of our other episodes. Of course, we do our news show every week, sometimes every other week. It really just depends. We're dropping a lot more videos on social media. We're really trying to change some stuff and trying to test some things out. So your engagement and your appreciation in it is always helpful. But definitely check out our other episodes, some great interviews. Last week we had Nadine Roos, amazing young woman who's killing it for the Springbok women. If you guys seen WXV, she is a beast at fly half, man, an absolute beast. We've had Joanne Yap, who's the head coach for Australia, also doing well in WXV. And, we have a slew of people: Blaine Scully, Ryan Ginty, Lance Kavanaugh, Nia Tapper, Roots Rugby. Man, we've been doing this for a while, but these conversations are everlasting. So, guys, definitely check it out. But in the meantime, I hope you guys know, I hope that you're happy. I hope that you're healthy. But most importantly, and absolutely central to it all, I hope that you know that you are truly highly favored. Till next time, y'all. Cheers.